Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro has pleaded not guilty during his appearance in a New York City court. Maduro and First Lady Celia Flores face 3 charges, including drug-related offenses. Now, the United Nations Security Council largely condemned the United States' military action in Venezuela, with only a few dissenting voices supporting that very operation. President Donald Trump, who ordered the operation to arrest the couple has vowed that the U.S. will oversee Venezuela until a democratic transition takes place. Joining us now to break down this developing situation is civil rights activist Devin Barrington-Ward. Devin, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it, especially that you're stateside in Atlanta right now, and of course a very late one for you there. But when you hear what came out of that UN Security Council meeting on an emergency basis, did it strike you as really resulting in anything that would be of substance?
Not really. I think the fact of the matter is that we've continued to see this administration here in the United States reject norms, international norms, the ways that countries engage with one another through diplomacy and conversation. And so when we have seen these type of instances in the past with this particular president, leaders here in the United States and members of Congress and in the Senate have not reined in Donald Trump. They didn't do it during his first term. They're not doing it now. And world leaders are also not reining in Donald Trump and really doing that in a way that doesn't just rely on words, but that relies on action as well.
Yeah, because condemning is pretty much par for the course, right? But it feels as though there's a lack of actual action here. What can be done, Devin?
Well, we have midterm elections here in the United States this year. And so both chambers of Congress, both the House of Representatives and the Senate, will have major elections throughout states that are very competitive. Because right now, if you look at the polling in the United States, you see that only 33% of U.S. citizens support this administration's actions, illegal actions in Venezuela, because those actions are not just illegal by international law, they're also illegal here in the United States. In order for any president to engage in war against another sovereign nation, they must get an authorization from Congress. And Congress was not notified. Members of very key committees like the Intelligence Committee and others were not notified about this illegal action that was taking place in Venezuela. And people are pissed here in the United States because it is reminiscent of Iraq, Afghanistan, Panama, Libya, and the list goes on and on and on. We have seen this song, we've heard this song, we've seen this movie before, and we know that it's not going to end well, because one of the things that the United States is not good at all is regime change.
Yeah.
And we have history on our side to show that the United States has failed at nation building. There's a former defense secretary, a black man, Colin Powell, who had this famous doctrine that it was the bull in the China shop doctrine, in the sense that if you break it, you own it. And the United States has not learned any lessons from our failures in Iraq and in Afghanistan. At the same time, U.S. citizens are worried about how they're going to pay for their health care. Health insurance premiums here in the United States are expected to triple for the average American because of the failure of leadership in Washington, D.C. And so these are not really the priorities that people sent, Donald Trump and his party in Congress to go and do in Washington, D.C. And so there is actually outrage on both sides of the aisle right now. And there may be real consequences for this administration at the ballot box when it comes to this upcoming election cycle.
Devin, my only worry with that, though, is and maybe if there is any silver lining to some of the other instances you've made note of, is that with Iraq, for example, George W. Bush did go and get approval from Congress. So there was that following of the rule of law. Here, there wasn't even that. So even at the ballot box, does it then matter whether he wins or loses any seats when it comes to the midterm elections? Because he's just willfully doing things on his own accord. And you speak about U.S. citizens themselves struggling. with even things like food prices, which is a major thing that he ran on, President Donald Trump still not being able to do that. And as you said, his priorities still not the ones he ran on.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really clear is that Democrats are complicit in this, Republicans are complicit because when there was the opportunity to do what Brazil did with its former president when he attempted to steal an election, they held him accountable in a criminal court of law. And they ensured that he was unable to run for future elections. And so people advocated their responsibilities both on the Democratic side and on the Republican side, out of a fear of backlash, out of a fear of not being able to win elections when literally democracy is on the line. And so the hope is that people who are in Congress now or who are running for Congress who have not actually been in elected office have a different type of mandate when they get elected, because the public now is recognizing that those who did vote for Donald Trump, that they were lied to. One of the misconceptions, because Mr. Trump loves to speak in very hyperbolic language, is that Donald Trump won the last election cycle by a landslide. He did not. And so while he did win by a majority of Americans, it was a small majority of Americans when you consider the entire voting populace. And so there are very much people who are upset with this president, and we'll have to see what the ramifications of our elections will have.
Devin, how concerned were you that there weren't louder or more stern voices from the international voices that were even at the UN Security Council? It felt as though, shall we say, the nations outside the G7 were the ones with the more stern voices or more clear with what it is that they were actually looking for here.
But we saw this before when we saw genocide taking place in Gaza, and people had lots of words, but Nicolás Maduro has been arrested, and Benjamin Netanyahu is still a free man. And so that is indicative of the leadership of the international community as a whole to hold big and small nations accountable for what we consider to be democratic norms or the rule of law, the ways that we try to engage one another through a peace framework. And so we're playing a very dicey game, because when this is allowed here in the Western Hemisphere, then there is nothing to push back on Putin and his encroach into Ukraine and trying to capture that into Russian territory. There's nothing that stops China from doing the same with Taiwan, because they will just say, well, the United States did it, and why are we any different? And that goes the same for big countries and small countries alike. And so this is an opportunity where people have to recognize that the board is being remade as far as who is considered to hold power on this planet. And we have to decide, where we fall in. And that's a conversation for people here in the United States. That's a conversation for people living in South Africa, because as these world powers move more to their particular hemispheres, Africa sits right in the middle, and African countries have to decide, what does this mean for them and their sovereignty as well?
Yeah. What did you think of the Security Council emergency meeting, though? I mean, did that reveal a system that is capable of of restraining major powers like the United States, which of course is the biggest funder of the United Nations itself anyway? Or is it a system kind of calibrated to absorb the shock and then just move on?
The latter, for sure. I mean, we got to just call a thing, and we can't mince words anymore, because the fact of the matter is that there are very real consequences while people are giving very eloquent speeches in the chamber of the United Nations. There is not real diplomacy and policy being made. And this is not just happening as it pertains to international conflict. We still can't move forward real agreements on climate change. We still can't move forward real agreements on ending hunger throughout the world. And so this is just another example of an entity that is frankly very dysfunctional, that has very little influence and impact as far as major world issues, we saw that the UN was essentially sidelined. UN peacekeepers were killed in Gaza, right?
Yeah.
And there was no accountability for that. And so, yes, it looks absolutely like an inept body, and that is very dangerous.
I think that is possibly the most fearful part here as well. What's the fear then for the rest of the world, you think? If something like this can ultimately happen, some will say, well, if you have oil, that's where your fear should be. Let's not forget that there were those bombings just in Nigeria not so long ago, and that is in itself an oil-rich nation. So what do you think the fears are here for the globe, particularly nations that have been at loggerheads with the United States, including South Africa?
Well, I mean, we saw today on Air Force One, Donald Trump talk about the need to put Colombia in check, which is Venezuela's next door neighbor, to put Greenland within the pocket of the United States while it is still territory of Denmark. This is the type of rhetoric that we are seeing from a very dangerous president, and it will require world leaders to make very tough decisions. And our hopes is that those decisions are made in a way that, preserves life, both in their countries and abroad. But, the United States is playing a very dangerous game, because when the United States takes this type of action, what leg does it have to stand on to condemn the actions of other countries who may engage in this? And so I think the other thing that people have to recognize and really own is that colonization has never really ended. It has just morphed into different terms, analogy, but it is essentially still the same mentality that resources that don't rightfully belong to other nation states and very rich white men, use force to capture those resources to enrich themselves and their shareholders. That's what it's about. And so people have to recognize what it is, and then they have to make real decisions and hold their country's leaders accountable to decisions that are going to protect their interests, while at the same time still having those moral conversations in bodies like the United Nations. But it's very clear that, diplomacy is really going to happen, country to country, and, relationship to relationship. In some ways, we've got to get back to old school grassroots community organizing through an international foreign policy framework.
Yeah, because certainly multilateralism seems to be in itself falling by the wayside in many instances. Devin, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us as well. So late in the evening, some really important conversations here. Devin Barrington-Ward, a civil rights activist, joining us as we just talk a little bit more about the UN Security Council's emergency meeting yesterday condemning the attack by the United States.